57.
Let's get right into the good spot. Jeez. All right.
Price. Price is the third triangulation data point that makes any of those other numbers matter. For instance, if it had crap performance and it gave you mediocre, gaming in 1080p or whatever, and it cost 20 bucks, okay, that's a good value if it gave you gaming performance at 20 bucks. If it gives you okay performance at $1,000, that's a whole different story. Spoiler alert, these 5070 Ti's are costing $1,000. Moving on. We're gonna talk about performance, power draw, temperature, generational performance uplift, all the normal outline stuff that I've kind of come up with our revamped testing style. Obviously, once again, huge thanks to GN for helping us revamp our lab, which has literally been going nonstop for a month. So you'll notice that our charts have grown. They're gonna continue to grow. We're gonna go all the way back to 20 series to make sure that we've got as much data that we can make it relevant for people that are looking to upgrade if they're a generation 2, 3, or 4 old, okay? So key specs, it's got 8,960 CUDA cores on the GB203 or Blackwell, obviously. 4070 Ti respectively has 7,680 CUDA cores, and then 3070 Ti has 6,100.
So yeah, it's not a big improvement for CUDA cores. What up, Hart? Yeah, it's not a big improvement for CUDA cores. RT cores, it's a pretty big improvement, almost 20. Tensor cores is not a big improvement. VRAM, it's a big improvement, and it's GDDR7. Oh, I wish, man. They're good. They're good from what I've seen. Like, it's not like they're terrible, but for like a 4080 Super or 4070 Ti Super, it's like a 6% increase apparently. Kind of makes sense. This 4070 Ti Super is an overclocked super clock basically. But it's fast. It's fast. It's not
And 40 CUDA cores.
So apparently the 5090s are having CPU bottlenecks, but everyone I've been noticing is using a 7000 or 9800X 3D, and yeah, kind of makes sense. They're not pairing it with like a 14900K or a 285K that can actually support its power, because it's only got 9800X 3D only has 8 cores.
So that's the generational uplift that we're talking about. I only did the calculations between 4070 and 5070. We know 3070 to 4070 is like 80% across the board.
But yeah, look, so bandwidth. Okay, we're gonna look at the bandwidth right here. So again, it's not a huge improvement for CUDA cores, RT cores, Tensor cores, but VRAM it's double, which is a big improvement. GDDR7 is a big improvement. The bandwidth though, so if we go back to 3070 Ti, which I got, and the bandwidth is 608 gigabytes per second. So like that's amazing, right? Because the 4070 Ti is only 504, which it doesn't really make sense. It doesn't make sense why they made it lower bandwidth. Going into the 5070 Ti, almost 900 gigabits per second, so that's pretty good. But yeah, GDDR6 versus GDDR7, GDDR7's just, from what I've read on, it's crazy good.
Once NVIDIA got off or back on
Need a
TSMC
CPU
and
paired
off
with
the
it though to make it work
8nm
good.
process that Samsung had, performance came up quite a bit. RT cores are running on the 4th gen RT core. There's 70 of them. 60 RT cores, which are 3rd gen, found in the 4070 Ti, and 48 RT cores found in the 3070 Ti, which are 2nd gen. So any of our tests that use RT, that's where you'll see the newer cards really kind of shine, specifically because there's more RT cores and they're faster, smarter, can do the math quicker RT cores. So that's how that works. Tensor cores, again, there's more of them, 280 in the 5070 Ti, which are 5th gen tensor cores versus 4th
88
gen.
more.
240 cores
Tensor
found in the
cores
4070 Ti,
more.
and 192 of them found in the 3070 Ti, which are 3rd gen cores. 16 gigabytes of GDDR7, no GDDR7X this time around, which is kind of interesting. Almost.
Okay, so what he doesn't know is, so GDDR6X is ECC error correcting memory of its VRAM. So VRAM, it's error correcting VRAM that's put on to the GDDR6X, which is by Micron. It's only by Micron. So GDDR7 is also error correcting. So it's an error correcting without, it'll be Micron or Samsung or Hynix, and it's gonna be error correcting. So that's one thing that he probably does not know about doing this is, or remember from his reviews, because he reviews so much stuff, he probably just doesn't remember that GDDR6X is Micron and it's error correcting versus GDDR7, which is just error correcting. So there won't be any X models probably. If they make like an X model, it won't be error, it will be error correcting, but they'll probably make it so it has faster bandwidth than what this is, which is almost 900, which is pretty good for medium tier GPU.
Every family launch has had X. I'd expected it on the 5090 and 5080. Didn't exist, so maybe there is no X variant this time around. Apparently X not going to give it to you. 256-bit bus, PCIe Gen 5 obviously, for an effective 896 gigabytes per second of bandwidth. Base clock 2300, boost clock 2452. I didn't do a frequency chart on this one. It boosts right up to about 2800 megahertz depending on the model. Keep in mind, this...
Yeah, there's only the high-end models will only go up to 2667, I believe, is what I remember. So the 2800, he probably has an overclock to get it up that high, but apparently the overclock you can do almost like plus 400 on the core, so you can probably do almost 3000. Yeah, it's up to you, right? And I love the 10 series. I've had 1070, 1080. I have 1080 and 1080 Ti. Great cards. And the 10 series cards, there hasn't been an actual like increase of performance from like the 900 series to the 10 series. The performance difference was crazy. Before that as well, going from the 700 to the 900 series, same thing. Crazy good uplift. And now the uplifts are like 6%. Like we're looking at 6% increase, and that's due to the fact only really for the AI, like neural network, whatever they got into this. It's only AI that's making them work so good.
This is the Asus Prime, supposed to be an MSRP model. It's not, no matter what NVIDIA...
Although I will say that the wattage nowadays is a lot better, because now we got, like my 3070 Ti well, the TDP on a 1080 Ti I do believe was 250 to 280 depending on the models, and they can bump them up to like over 300. So like my 3070 Ti has the same wattage as that, but it's also 3 times as powerful as them. So That's one thing you gotta look at. And then these cards here are 300 watts and pretty good. It's just mostly the AI. The AI is helping it a lot.
Or anyone says it's not an MSRP model. We'll talk about that today. There is no Founders Edition card for this particular 70 Ti. There was,
and NVIDIA put it out there a while ago. There's no Founders Edition cards for this one because it's such a low-end card. They're gonna have to redesign the cooler, do all these processing and stuff. So for NVIDIA, it's a smart move because they can maximize the profit on not having like their own in-house make of the model. So it's good.
was also not a Founders Edition card for
Smart
the
move for
4070 Ti. There was, however, a Founders Edition card for the 30 series cards. So you're going to see a good maybe 2 or 3% variance depending on the model that you look at. This is not the OC model. OC models tend to have anywhere between like 50 to maybe 100 megahertz additional boost clock.
The additional boost clock is more than that on these cards.
Depending on the cooler design. So you're going to see a lot of variance depending on the models that you're looking at, on how robust the cooler is, what the overall temperatures are, the power limits. They all have their different kind of secret sauces baked in based on the AIB that you buy from. So our tests are run specifically at stock power limit, which is 300 watt TDP, and well, supposed to be on this card. This card actually goes a little higher. We'll talk about that today. So even though it's,
they'll go up to like
it's supposed to be like a reference-ish style, which is what the Prime kind of is now. You'll notice Prime has been around for ASUS on
smaller,
the motherboard
cooler,
side for a long time, denoting it's more of an
doesn't clock as
entry-level
high.
product.
Makes sense.
It's now available on the GPU side. Unfortunately, this is an entry-level product that really wants premium
Card
pricing,
looks
and we'll
good.
talk about that again in a second. So this probably does have a slightly uplifted TDP on this, unfortunately, because the card.
So you see, yeah, you see right here how it has the blow-through style. I kind of want to do that with my 3070 Ti. Just cut a big hole in the one side, because it's just a pain. It just heats up the card so much from that one side.
Is sent by NVIDIA and not ASUS. I don't have a deck specifically for this card, so I don't know what its base TDP is supposed to be. I guess GPU-Z could have probably told me, but I don't care about that. I care about what's actually being drawn through the cable, which is what we measured. Okay.
Also, one thing that ASUS has done and has been doing for a long time is doing this little ASUS on the like the retentioning spot on the actual PCB. They put the ASUS, so they've been doing that for a long time. It's nice. But continuing on, even with their not high-end cards.
Gaming performance, you know what? We'll put the charts on the screen like we typically do, pause the ones you want to look at. I can tell you right now, across the board, it either lands just under a 4080, just above a 4080, and under a 4080 Super, and sometimes beats a 4080 Super. It really...
So I was checking out these stats here on my overclocking forum there. Well, not forum, but the overclocking website, HWbot.org. And yeah, it performs pretty good in this. But they're also using it with a 9800X 3D, which if you pair it up with a 13900K, it's going to do better than this. Guaranteed. So yeah, they're making it so it's no CPU, so it's custom run. No, well, they didn't have to do that. They could have just ran it even with the normal one and just looked at the actual GPU performance and not the overall performance, and it would have given the same. Me too, man. I see a lot of e-waste right now. With 5090s too, with apparently the issues with the melting cables, like they're not gonna RMA it. That's user fault.
really is just mingling with the 4080 crowd, beating the 4070 Ti Super across the board as it was expected. So realistically, it's a 4070.
So yeah, I've never played this, but I've seen some reviews on this. So the Avatar game, performance see 3070 Ti, and this is just the FE model, 84 frames, low of 62. Then we go up to the 5070 right here, Prime 162, so double the performance in this game. It's pretty good.
Ti Super or 4070.
And that's the thing though, did they even check to see if it had a bottleneck? If the 5070 Ti was bottlenecking it, could be better. But every YouTuber that I've seen is pairing it up with a 9800X 3D, and it's bottlenecking them. So, and they're only still, because it's AMD, AMD 6000, DDR5 6000 mega transfer, CL28 though, that's pretty good. Oh, yeah, that's right, he used a one kit, CL28 kit. It's pretty good. But 6000, if you erase this, remember, it's how fast that the CPU talks to the RAM, talks to GPU, and puts like the signal back and forth is gonna also be a bottleneck for the GPU. So even though it's CL28, it still needs to be a faster RAM.
Ti Super, or a 4070 Platinum. I don't know what I don't know what to call it anymore. Maybe we have a more precious metal now that NVIDIA can slide in there, since they like to put 4 graphics cards now in between a family of graphics cards. I mean, it does perform.
Yeah, that's just terrible right here. So 5070 Ti Prime is under 4080, under another 4080 Super. It's underneath the 7900 XTX in this game. Like, what? The 7900 XTX should be outbeaten by like 5070 Ti for sure, because even their 4080 Super is like right there. So, just brutal.
Cards. I mean, it does perform right around a 4080 Super, which at the time.
It's like, okay, that's actually like 20% almost increase, so it's pretty good there.
Time was a $1,200 card or a $999 card, which never really existed at those prices very often. But the fact that
as soon as you go to 4080 Super, it's matching a 4080 Super last gen. Last gen. I don't recall what they used though. What did they? Because they're going off a reference. Remember, they're going off a reference and when they tested the 4080 Super FE. So, like, did they actually use 900X 3D at 5.3 gigahertz, 32 gigabytes at 6000 CL28? I don't know. But yeah, 1080p, apparently it's matching last gen.
this is very often. But the fact that it trades blows with those cards, it's not anything terrible to write home about. It has a $749 MSRP, which is $50 less than the 4070 Ti's MSRP of $799. But we all know those prices are artificial.
No, the 4080 is beating it in the F1. The 4080. Nope, not X1. Next one. Yeah, there it is. Sorry, Horizon. In Horizon, 4080 is beating the 5070 Ti. What? By 3 frames, but I mean, still.
Truly exist, really, at least not for the last several generations, because supply has significantly not kept up with demand, and that's by design.
So
NVIDIA has
keep up demand because all these big PC
the amount
companies
of
are buying them,
inventory out
putting
in the
them
market,
PCs
specifically
and marking
with
them
40
up.
series low. They kind of learned from their lesson with 30 series, where they had too much 3090s and 3080s and 3080 Ti's in the wild. So there was a huge overlap of inventory with previous gen with new gen, making new gen not worth really buying. This time they stopped producing months and months ago on 40 series cards, which means now you're finding, and I looked, 4070 Ti's today costing as much as $1,200 on the used market. It is a complete shit show. Anyway, moving on, let's talk about the percentage of performance uplift. I started talking about price, but that's another whole part of this video. Our average generational uplift across our gaming benchmarks, not the synthetics, is 21.46%. That's kind of right in the generational uplift we tend to see, anywhere between 20 to 25%. The thing is, there's a couple of titles on here pulling up that average, because remember, my average is only among 7 actual gaming titles and 2 synthetics. We don't include
only 7 game titles, so yeah, there could be a lot more. That's why I got a couple videos to go through, see actual
realistically be a little lower
see
than
if
that.
they
So
all
for
match.
instance, Cyberpunk gave me a 30.1% uplift in performance, but our Cyberpunk test is specifically running ray tracing medium at 4K. Actually, let me back up. Our previous generational uplifts we measured at 4K because they were 80 and 90 tier cards. 70 tier cards, I tend to sweet spot 1440. Even though this card is very capable of 4K gaming in most titles, and you can see our titles are like maxed out settings for the most part to try and see what the worst case performance would be like for the card. 1440p gaming, however, this card can do absolutely no problem. So my generational uplift percentages are based on 1440 this time,
but
not
for 1080p,
4K.
it's matching
so
last gen.
30.1% uplift in 1440, more than likely due to the improved 4th gen RT cores. So there's more RT cores. It's a very heavy RT title, and that's kind of what Cyberpunk is at this point. It is an RT benchmark for the most part. But Stalker 2 gave us 16.3% uplift, Avatar 16.7, Horizon Forbidden West 15.8. So you can see in these tests that are more raster, we are definitely seeing only about 15 to 16% performance uplift generation from 4070 Ti to 5070 Ti. Borderlands 3, which is a heavy raster test though, where more CUDA cores the better, no RT or anything in that, 25.6%. And then F1, 20.8. And so, I mean, you can see.
I'm hoping Bauer didn't use the 9800X 3D. He actually used like a 285K or something. So that way it'll be, because there will be a big difference in frames for certain games.
You've got the 20% in F1, the 24% in Black Myth, and the 30% in Cyberpunk pulling up that average. But really, it's more like a sub 20 if we had more titles to test, I think. That's why guys like Hardware Unboxed that does like, when they do like their 45 titles tested, that gives you a huge sampling to really figure out what those averages are. So definitely go check out the Hardware Unboxed guys if you haven't. They definitely not go the extra mile, they go the extra 10 kilometers. Got to get the measurements correct for them. I don't think they use miles in Australia, but I could be wrong. Temps, 65 degrees across the board. Aftermarket cooler, as you'd expect. Didn't matter if it was Furmark, didn't matter if it was Cyberpunk, it was 65 degrees. The FE card, the 3070 Ti actually hits 80, but that's because this card is a little bit, I mean, the 3070 Ti doesn't have the greatest cooler design. They really erred on the side of acoustics over thermals. And again, stock fan curves. So you can see the 3070 Ti is like way up there, even though it is a lower TDP card. Speaking of TDP though, this is where we started, and I did something a little different this time.
It's a lower TDP? I don't think it is.
Actually took our PMD2 measurement device, which is an inline power meter that real-time measures the power going through the cable itself. But I also added what the software is reporting is being pulled from the PCI Express slot. If you recall, we have an issue right now with the PMD2 riser, which is supposed to allow us to measure PCIe Express power draw with the Gen 5 cards. It's giving us a problem even if we switch to Gen 4 on the board. So I just took the software reading, which to be honest was 20 watts on the 4070 or 3070, I believe it was. But I just added those to the PMD. So where you're seeing total board power now, there's a difference between graphics power, which is just what the core is drawing, or total board power, which is what everything is drawing, whether it be fans, lighting, VRMs, memory, all of that combined. So the total board power was actually pulling in Furmark over 320 watts at times, bouncing more or less between 315 and 320. So as you can see, that is higher than the 300 watt TDP that the card is advertised to be. Again,
mine hits a lot more than that. My 3070 Ti, it hits up here. Then it can hit up all the way up here. But yeah, it's generally right around 300. For games, it doesn't even use that. So, but for Furmark, yeah. For one of the benchmarks I do, yeah, it draws 440 watts.
Could be because the Prime might have a slightly higher baseline TDP than what reference would be. But since we don't have a reference card or an FE card direct from the manufacturer, there's going to probably be some variance in there, again, based on the AIB or AIC that you go with. Yeah, and also too, that was in 4K, the power draw test. We wanted to load the card up as high as possible. So again, 4K Furmark or 4K Cyberpunk, bouncing anywhere. And Cyberpunk actually has lower dips. See, Furmark is a constant, very difficult fuzzy donut to render. So across the board, it's a much more solid line because it's pegged against that power limiter. But in the Cyberpunk, depending on what's being rendered on the scene, things that are particularly happening, there's a lot of variation in a game versus something like a stress test like the fuzzy donut and Furmark. You'll see it bounce about 25 watts between 300 and 325. Not terrible, but is definitely a trend of the 70 series cards getting more power hungry too, considering the fact that we went from 290 up to 300, and as you can see, it's pulling more than 300 now on this. Let's go ahead and talk about the elephant in the room. Write your best fat joke down below, I might pin it. Anyway, moving on, price. We showed on Twitter, and I've got a whole price chart on here, we'll talk about this in a second.
750.
We showed on Twitter that Micro Center put up its pricing early and shows an available date of February 20th. That is the on-shelf date. These review embargoes today that you're seeing on the 19th are supposed to be for the MSRP models. That means the $750 price point. However, we put a video up already that's actually gone quite popular showing a $900 price tag on this exact card.
150
so I reached out to folks that are also not allowed to give official public statements from any company I'm about to mention. But I can tell you, NVIDIA specifically sent this card, because remember, they don't make a founder's card, because it was an MSRP model. However, what you're gonna notice today is there are folks that were sent this card by ASUS. ASUS has communicated to their direct seeded reviewers. We were seeded by NVIDIA. The AIBs can also send their own models out to people if they want. Typically, the Founders Edition card would be the day early launch or the embargo lift or MSRP model, but it's almost always FE if it exists. And then every other card that costs more than that has to wait till the next day. It's the way it's been since 30 series. This same card sent to other reviewers, not by NVIDIA, has to wait till the 20th because ASUS has communicated it is not an MSRP model. So to summarize the video I just put live the other day, that $900 is what Micro Center is showing this pricing is. Micro Center does not lift the price. Micro Center is one of the few bastions where you can trust
they go
that they are not going to increase the price.
The manufacturer.
They sell them at
to
the suggested retail price given to them by the AIBs. In this instance, it's $899.99 USD. Then I posted that, reached out to NVIDIA and said, WTF, bro, we were told this is a $750 card. We need to know what the price really is. That affects everything regarding our review. And we were told it's a $750 card, it's a $750 card. I don't know why ASUS and Micro Center are saying anything different. It's a $750 card. So then Micro Center updated its pricing, I'm assuming through pressure by NVIDIA, because you'll notice that the $750 price is now there with the $899 scratched out. However, a couple hours later, the scratched out $899 is gone. Now it just says $749. But I posted all of this on Twitter showing that the price changed. None of the other models did. The MSIs, the Gigabytes, or any of the other cards, they still show $800, $939, $949, $999, $1,009. They all stayed the same except this one card. So my question was, did Micro Center make a boo-boo? Was the price wrong or whatever?
Yeah, Micro Center.
Then I started getting some anonymous messages. And I respect the people that provided me this. So I'm not gonna, they've asked me not to share who they are, I think for obvious reasons, because this is definitely a big pot stir. They are a reviewer that was sent the card by ASUS. And all communication stated not an MSRP card. So what I think happened, and I firmly believe this now, it was a speculation in my price video that the price sent to Micro Center was the real price, and the price told to NVIDIA was the paper price. We suspect it was never intended to launch at $750, and by Micro Center putting up the pricing early, let the cat out of the bag. Normally this is the kind of thing we reviewers find out after the fact. We have, when it goes live prior to on-shelf, we have to take the word of the people we work with. Those words are becoming less trustworthy because when stuff like this happens, there's 3 people involved. Who do we trust? We're talking about Micro Center, we're talking about ASUS or the AIB, AIC, any brand. And that's who we have for this one. So I don't know what Gigabyte has been communicating or MSI has been communicating or PNY or Gainword or any other brands. I only have this one to go by and ASUS or NVIDIA's word. The one I trust the most out of all 3 of those is Micro Center. Okay, I firmly believe Micro Center is just showing the price that's being communicated to them by their vendor suppliers. NVIDIA, I have a feeling, was under the assumption this is a $750 card because that's what was sent to them. It's really a $900 card. So that actually makes this 20% above MSRP at the $900 price point that is on Micro Center. But don't forget, it now shows $750. What we don't know, because I don't have a crystal ball to know the future, is what's going to happen on the 20th. This video is being filmed obviously prior to that. And I'm curious now if just to appease NVIDIA, the price of $750 was communicated to Micro Center, but then on day one, there's going to be a switch flip back to $900.
Probably.
That also, the amount of unfairity taking place for reviewers as well, where some of us were given this card and told February 19th, and others are told February 20th, presumably on the MSRP and not MSRP communications, we are assuming this card is $900. That is the most believable thing. That makes it the most overpriced, ridiculous thing.
Do you think it was ASUS?
No one on this planet that
I think it was
should consider buying
Micro
a
Center.
5070 Ti
Want
when
the
it
extra money.
encroaches on 4080 super pricing.
If they're gonna make it
Unfortunately, 4080
the
super
connector
pricing
smaller,
is like
make the card smaller.
$1,500+ right now. So
Kind of what they
you've
did.
kind of taken that whole price bracket and just
Kind of.
scooched it up a bit. They stayed separated, but they just, everything scooched up. And that's why I talked about in my video, this becoming a rich person's hobby really pisses me off. So I did a little searching. I went all the way back to the GTX 470. So weird to say. That launched in 2010, 15 years ago. I have put together a chart, and I will just put this on the screen, editing Phil, and just let it sit on screen while I talk about this real quick. You will see two.
Oh, he's doing it too. He's doing it. I didn't realize he's doing the 70 series GPU up from 10 years ago to now. I didn't realize he was doing it. Someone else did it. Smart. Because it's true. Look at the up crease. Look. Look at that. Boom. Boom. 970 to 1070 Ti. Brutal uplift. Didn't have a 970 Ti, so it makes sense. No, he didn't say it was ASUS. He said it was NVIDIA. Saying it was just a paper thing and it wasn't a thing to actually go off of. But ASUS already told Jay that it was $750 card. That's what it was.
Colors here. You will see blue, which is the launch price, and you will see pink, which is inflated for 2020 or corrected for 2025 inflation. So we can see and put it in correlation of what it would cost in today's money back then. Okay, so for instance, the GTX 470 launched at $349 with a corrected price of $508. The same year.
Look at this. About the same. About the same. 670. It's a little bit more. 770, a little bit less. 970. Low. It's because they're 980 Ti's and 990s, which is pretty high. True. Yeah. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they did. Micro Center up did it. Because they're straight from the manufacturer, so they probably got a bulk deal to get it from manufacturer to them, so that way they can sell it. And then ASUS probably can make them for like $300 or $400 and then sell them for $750. And then Micro Center can do that too, due to the fact there's none in stock. There's lots. So really why they stopped selling the 40 series or making the 40 series cards, because there's so many. Yeah, 1070 up. But look at these bumps up. 150, 200, over 200. No, 50, 150. What we at? 700, almost 800, almost $100. Brutal.
Or the 570 launch, it was kind of a late. It was like early 2010, and then
770. GTX 770 right here. Boom. So my last move broke again, so I have to refix it, but I'm pretty sure I have to get new like controllers for it. So like voltage controllers, regulators. I have to get new ones, replace them with it. The move got jarred around too much and it ripped them off. I tried to fix them up just because it ripped the pad right off too. I tried to just solder straight from the actual like voltage regulator on it. I tried to solder, it's very small wire basically. Try to solder that from the one side of the voltage controller to the other voltage controller side, which is where the traces go to. It's how the voltage will flow through it. Gets like double voltage regulator on it. It's nice. But yeah, I tried and yeah, it doesn't work. So I'll have to refix this one back up, but 770. And this was what, $500 back in the day? Almost 550.
Late 2010, because that was actually like the end of the era, technically. Anyway, the 570 launched at $349, and again, the same corrected price at $508. It was the same year. So a whole new tier of card for the same price. Okay, not at $349, that's where the 70 cards should be. That's where they belong, not the 60 series cards. That was the gamer card. This 4070, 5070, can't even say it. 470, 570, 670 were always like, you know what I'm trying to say if you've been around long enough. Anyway, the 670 or the Kepler cards launched at $399, a $50 increase, which a lot of people rolled their eyes at back then going, what the hell, why the $50 increase? $552 in today's money, that came out in 2012. The 770 came out at the same price, $400 in 2013, but because of the next year, it inflates to $544. 970 came out, remember the 4 gigs means 4 gigs era? Hey, it's been a while, right? Anyway, the 970 3.5 gigabyte card was $329, a $70 drop, which made people go, yay, but later it was like, oh, well, it's because I fucked up the memory. But that's $441 in today's money, and that was in 2014. In 2016, Pascal, the golden era of graphics happened, and the TI variants. So moving forward now, I'm comparing TI pricing because it didn't exist prior to that. The TIs only existed in the 60 series cards, which was super odd. But anyway, the 1070 Ti launched at $450. Do you know if this cost $450 today? Do you know what a different like video this would be? Now, yes, inflation, yes, tariffs, yes, TSMC price increases across the board over year on year. It's probably impossible for this to ever exist at that price point again. But could you just imagine, just wrap your mind around that for a moment? Because also too, don't be naive and think that the 5070 is going to be the $550 or whatever it's supposed to be. I forget the price. Phil can put the actual price on the screen. That's $595 in today's money in 2016. The RTX 2070 Ti came out at $499. I'd still take this for $500, right? $499? Again, that's about the upper limit a lot of people would spend on a graphics card. But anyway, $631 in today's money. 2018 is when that launched. 3070 Ti, the first card that's actually on our charts, $600. That was a $100 increase gen on gen, making it $702 in today's money, and that was in 2021. I don't need to explain to you what happened in the 30 series and what was going on in 2021 to know why the pricing got so stupid. Also too, that was the first time NVIDIA had switched fabs. They went over to Samsung, which they made an okay card, but Samsung really was behind the 8 ball or behind the curve on the performance that was expected. So NVIDIA went back to TSMC.
To be honest, back to TSMC, which is smart, instead of Samsung. TSMC is bigger than Samsung for the actual like processing of the actual chip. But for 2021 here, if you don't know much about it, as part of the ending of the like crypto, the ending as in the merge happened in 2021 there. So 2021 happened, sorry, not 2021, 2022. So anyone that was into crypto, they bought up a lot of the 30 series cards, especially the, we'll call it, at first, they were the low hash rate. So they weren't buying the low hash rate, gamers were getting them. But not long after that, they made it so basically all 30 series cards were not low hash rate, so all the crypto miners bought them up, like gobbled them up. So the price of them, I was paying I think it was right around $1,500 for mine. For the ones I bought for 3070 Ti's. I also bought them to mod them up, copper mod them, and then sell them off to people that wanted them for a markup. So I was selling them for over $1,600. It's insane.
Launching the 4070 Ti
Insane.
in 2023 at $799. Here's the crazy part. Enough inflation has happened since 2023 that we have a correction of $833. That's more than this technically costs in today's money. But again, this launched today at $750, but realistically, if we average out the prices that we're seeing on Micro Center's website, it's $950. So I made this chart.
Well, $899 for the low end, and then it goes up to $1,010 for the higher ends.
This is the gamer satisfaction per USD, or US dollar, per launch year. This is a troubling trend, as you can see. This is why I say that this is nothing more than a rich person's hobby. And that really sucks, because if you actually scroll around Reddit or any other PC forums or whatever, there are an awful lot of people saying, fuck it, I'm just gonna get a PS5 Pro and a monitor for cheaper than what one graphics card would cost PC gaming. And here's the real reason this is happening. Nothing I say, nothing Steve says, or his apostles, nothing Linus says makes a difference.
We make zero difference to NVIDIA. Okay, that's what he's saying. I'm a YouTuber as well. I make YouTube videos. I do content for this kind of stuff. That's why I'm doing this. But as even the bigger guy, so he's saying, because he's not big, but he's a big YouTuber. Anyone, doesn't matter if you have 16 million subscribers and you get millions of views, we mean nothing to NVIDIA, okay? Nothing. Absolute jack shit to NVIDIA. We are us gamers, even though they sell hundreds of thousands of these units and everyone uses NVIDIA, we still mean nothing to them because they don't make money off of us. They make money with their partners, with their big data centers and all that. That's why when they came out with that $1 million unit, people and manufacturers, manufacturers and data centers were gobbling it up. $1 million per unit. Per unit. And they filled warehouses full of them. So we mean nothing to them because of their partners. They make too much money off the data centers and their partners. We're nothing. Absolute nothing.
We don't change anything. Do you know why? This is not where NVIDIA makes its money anymore. It's all AI. And all you need to look at is just...
We could buy 1 million units of their 5090s, 1 million units. There will never be that many units. We can, the people can buy 1 million units and we still will maybe be a slight proportion of what they actually make. They're not multi-billion, they're making $40 to $50 billion per year off of other companies, not their GPU lines. We are nothing. People, we gobble them up, we're still nothing. We can go back all the way almost 10 years, all the GPUs bought into them, they still make nothing compared to the actual, what they actually make. We are nothing.
Since 2010, when I showed you these GPU price inflations.
I'll probably do a live stream of that too. I'll go back through how much they actually make per year, annually, or per month in GPUs and the sales for the partners. And I'll show that just one of their partners outrights every GPU bought in that month or that year. Just one of their partners.
And price changes. Look at the stock. And do you know who NVIDIA is interested in appeasing? It's those people who own that stock. So yes, NVIDIA took a big hit when DeepSeek came out, but it rebounded. It's on the rebound and going back up. And I'm kind of kicking my ass that I didn't buy it when it was down quite a bit. But that's also because I don't play the stocks. It's just way too volatile. So
it wasn't down that much though.
In a nutshell, 5070 Ti, it's about as fast as a 4080. Sometimes
AMD
a 4080 Super.
put into.
It costs $50 less technically Then the 4070 Ti, it's not going to be available.
Actually, we
The
should
real
have put it
price is
into
almost
Intel as well.
$1,000. It's
Back
not
when
worth
Intel
it.
had that issue
So anyway,
last year. Should have put money in late then.
To just sort of conclude here, I just can't imagine, I guess I have to, it's happening, a 70 series card, whether it's a Ti or not, costing nearly $1,000. The Ti models used to be $50 to $100 more maybe. Like if I had the non-Ti versions on there from Pascal forward, you would see about a $50 to $100 difference depending on the model. It's out of control. It's out of control. NVIDIA is not for the gamer anymore. They are for AI profit.
Good time. Good time to end this one. I'm not ending the stream though. I'm going to the next video. But what he was showing was their own units that they're making with the Blackwell CPU and GPU supercomputers for your desk that you can double stack, you can link them together. Those probably make them a lot of money. But let's go on to actually hardcore overclocking.
Here, and today
And we're gonna look at
upper layer,
PCB.
or probably multiple layers. I don't know how many layers this PCB has, but yeah,
It's probably like a 12 ply. It's a thick
I just
PCB.
find that kind of cool to look at. I'm imagining we probably have voltage labels on this. Okay, we've got 1.2 volts, GPU M. I believe that's MSVDD. This is one thing that's been bugging me with the 50 series, is that it looks like they've split up the memory power. Oh, this is at 1 volt. Okay, so that kind of makes sense, because usually at very low voltages, the efficiency gets worse.
Which is timestamps.
In terms of power losses, 500 kilohertz, and then we have 1 megahertz, 800 kilohertz. This is still not great. Like 2 watts, it hits 2 watts. It goes over 2 watts already at 20 amps. It's like 2.5.
That is actually pretty crazy.
That's kind
The
of
loss.
awful. I wonder.
That's not really what I wanted to see, though. Oh, he's just going over different manufacturers' PCBs. They're all going to be about the same. I think with a tighter PCB, every component's a bit tighter. As long as you can keep those components cool, you're actually get a better signal to the core. So that's why it's able to clock so high. So maybe we'll skip actually hardcore overclocking, because it's just him going over all the PCBs, which would be about the same. Might use a little bit different components depending on what models they're using too, but the performance will be roughly the same compared to all of them. So we will go to Pulse Hardware.
It seems like NVIDIA was so close this time they almost had a reasonable RTX 50 series GPU. Welcome to my video on the RTX 5070 Ti. Once again, I'm making an alternative launch day video with some slightly different content than usual. If you want to know why, you might have seen my video earlier today where I talked about this only arriving within the last 24 hours, which is not enough time to do a full review.
So remember the last video there with Jay's 2 cents? They also did the ASUS Prime, which is supposed to be the MSRP model. They also, probably all the content creators got the ASUS Prime because it's supposed to be the MSRP model that ASUS is sending out to everybody. Or Micro Center could be giving it to them depending on what they're being sponsored by at the time. If ASUS is actually going to sponsor it, if Micro Center has already got the deal for them, all these things. But they're doing the MSRP lineup. So I'm pretty sure Micro Center marked up their GPUs, the 5070 Ti's, from $750 up to $899 for markup.
But since a lot of you guys enjoyed my RTX 5090 review roundup, as well as my RTX 5080 generational uplift video, I thought for the 5070 Ti, ¿por qué no los dos? Excellent! Today's video is brought to you by the Paul's Hardware store.
Yes, everyone's doing hats now.
By the way. So one thing that I do really like about launch days still, despite so many of the things that I used to like about them not being things anymore, thanks to pricing being out of control and a general lack of enthusiasm as a result of those really crazy prices. But I do still like how when a new GPU launches, there's going to be a bunch of reviews that go up, and you can check out a wide variety of them in order to get sort of a broad assessment of the new product from a bunch of different sources. And the reviews that I've selected today are all from sources that I trust. We have Hardware Unboxed, Gamers Nexus, Optimum, Linus Tech Tips, Derbauer, and Jay's 2 Cents, and all of their videos are linked.
So, oh, he's linked them? Nice. So, I will be going with Derbauer as well. GN and Linus Tech Tips. Just because I want to see what they both have to say. Not really take word on what GN says about it, because he makes noise for no reason sometimes. So I just want to see what the performance is compared to every other YouTuber with the exact same card.
Linus Tech Tips, Derbauer, and Jay's 2 Cents, and all of their videos are linked in the description. If you haven't watched them yet, I recommend checking them out if you want a lot more detail than what I'm going to go over today. But the too long didn't watch summary is, if the 5070 Ti was actually its base MSRP price of $750 as promised, it would be a reasonable price to performance offering given current pricing and availability, because there are no other cards to even buy in this price range right now, especially if you're in the US. They're all sold out. Now, those are already some pretty serious caveats, because if there are no other alternative GPUs to buy, then we are simply at the mercy of NVIDIA, add-in board partners, and retailers to sell these cards for a reasonable price. But we all already know that that's just not going to happen. When demand is high and supply is low, the people who are in charge of the supply are going to try to make as much profit as possible in that situation. And hence, while there are a handful of supposedly MSRP RTX 5070 Ti's, like this Asus Prime model, which is not overclocked, but the assumption that I and many others are making is that these MSRP cards are going to be extremely scarce, and chances are what you'll actually see available at retail, if any are available at all, will be the cards that cost $900 plus. Part of the reason for that is that while we have seen a few listings at $750 for these cards, there's a big gap between those and the next tier up. Those all just seem to start at $900, which is a very big jump from the base price. But as long as you are aware that that $750 promise is probably going to be broken, we can proceed and talk about other things, like the actual performance of the card, which is not horrible. And that's not necessarily a ringing endorsement, but it kind of is given the current state of NVIDIA GPU launches lately, especially with the RTX 50 series. The 5070 Ti performs about the same as a 4080 or a 4080 Super, and those cards cost $1,000. So does that mean $1,000 is reasonable for the 5070 Ti? Well, NVIDIA seems to think so, and probably the scalpers out there are going to be thinking
NVIDIA was not the... NVIDIA has the price of it. They came out with the price of it back when CES came out. They said these are going to be the prices, but NVIDIA does not have a Founders Edition card. Like, no Founders Edition card at all for the 5070 Ti. So it's up to the manufacturers whether or not they want to up the price anyways. Because coming from NVIDIA, it would be like a Founders Edition card. It would be a $750 card.
Thinking so as well, as I'm not going to be too surprised if we see these jump up well above $1,000, at least in the few days after launch, or until NVIDIA can get more units onto store shelves, and we don't know how long that's going to take. Still, NVIDIA was on the verge of the reviews for the 5070 Ti not being terrible, but unfortunately the generational performance uplift, as we'll look at in just a moment, is pretty stagnant once again, given that the 5070 Ti is typically a few frames behind a 4080 or 4080 Super. So all of the reviews are pretty much saying the same thing. Do not buy this GPU, particularly if it costs $1,000 plus. But as a follow-up prediction, I will say, once again, none of the reviewers' advice is going to matter, because these are going to sell out anyway. Okay, let's take a look at some more specific data from the review roundup. The overall conclusion is that the RTX 5070 Ti, when compared to last generation, and you might be comparing it to the 4070 Ti or the 4070 Ti Super, is that you're going to see about a 7 to 20% raw performance boost over the RTX 40.
Yeah. 10 frames more, so that's average.
4070 Ti Super, or more like a 15 to 20% boost versus the 4070 Ti non-Super, because the 4070 and older generations is not quite as
Oh,
disappointing compared to the
So,
recent reviews
different
of
game.
5080 and 5090. And on the plus side, efficiency is actually looking quite good too. That has been a strong point for NVIDIA for some time now, with typical draw for the 5070 Ti being below 300 watts, resulting in some nice, cool running temperatures.
Look at this. Like almost the exact same charts as Jay's 2 cents. 900X 3D. CL28. 6000. Why?
Performance per watt is also a strong point as gamers out, particularly when compared to AMD's 7900 series GPUs. What reviews have really struggled to address is how things will look tomorrow, though, when 5070 Ti GPUs, 4070 Super and the 7800 XT, which were both among the best options for bang for the buck in the mid-range for the past year or so.
I'm pretty sure
But
he
when
didn't
you
have
ratchet
time
that
to make
price
this
up
video.
to 900
If I remember correctly from one of his older videos, not older, but I think it was yesterday or a couple days now, but older video. He just received the card, so maybe he did have to take a lot of specs from other YouTubers for the actual performance.
$100 or more, the cost per frame jumps
Because yeah, he just opened it, so
by about $1.50,
he had no choice.
and the 5070 Ti joins this group of extremely poor value cards at closer to $12 per frame. And remember, even this top group up here with the 4070 Super and the 7800 XT isn't the best in terms of value. What we really want from a new generation of GPUs is a significant increase in value versus last gen, not just cozying right up to it and hoping things will be fine for another couple years. Next up, we're going to take a look at a chart that I put together showing the generational uplift of
Okay, so he also did it. Is this gonna be a trend among all these YouTubers? Well, back in when the 4070 came out, except for he doesn't have 4070, he only went back as far as the, or did he? No, yeah, he only went back as far as the 670. So, nah, man, nah. Sorry, man, I have to skip.
reasons why the pricing is so horrible, but a big reason is that these Blackwell GPUs
Yeah, okay, this is one they'll have to learn here too. So, TSMC 40 nanometer back in 2009, 2011 for the Tesla and Fermis, for the Kepler, which is 2012, 2015, which is going to be your 670s to 980 Ti's. Maxwell's the 980 or 900 series. It's going to be Maxwell, and Maxwell was actually a breaking point for GPU, which is really good. TSMC 28 nanometers, 2016 to 2018, 1070, 1080 Ti, which could be with the Pascal, which is the best, basically performance gains that we've gotten for any generation of GPUs. Pascal 16 nanometer, which is going to be TSMC and Samsung. Samsung was a 14 nanometer, and they split that off. 2018 to 2020 is going to be 1660s, so your 1650s, 16, like all of them, are going to be up around the Turing, which is 2070, and 2080 Ti, which is Turing. Your 2080 Super and all that, you know, all of those cards, the 20 series. TSMC, which is 12 nanometers, which isn't a much decrease from the Samsung. TSMC 12 nanometers though, for 2020, 2022, which is going to be a 30 series cards. Ampere, Samsung is 8 nanometers. 2022, 2024 is 4070, 4080 Super, 4090, all those 40 series cards. It's Ada Lovelace. TSMC 4 nanometer, and then now what we have here, which is also TSMC 4 nanometer, but this is going to be the Blackwell architecture. And then we also have the Grace Blackwell, which is the CPU side.
GPUs are still built on TSMC's 4N process, which is why NVIDIA had to stop production of the 40 series cards in order to switch over production to the 50 series cards. And they could have mitigated this situation, I think, if they had made some accommodations.
So apparently this generation, the 50 series cards, were supposed to be 2 or 3 nanometer, not the 4 nanometer. So maybe this is why there's such a, like, not a big performance gain, due to the fact that it's the same nanometers, but there's a lot of people don't think that you can only go so small, right? So we're almost at a hardware limit. That's why they've been trying to make new, so instead of having silicon, instead of doing that way with silicon, making the actual dies, the actual GPU dies like CPUs, instead of doing like lithography with silicon, they've been trying it with different kind of materials. And because they knew back almost 10 years ago now, they knew they were going to hit a hardware limit eventually, and that you just going to have to keep increasing the power, and then you can only go so small while increasing the power, and then you can get a better efficiency with lower nanometer and more, CUDA cores, tensor cores, and all that. You can get more efficiency out of them, but you'd also have to think that the silicon can only handle so much. Like, it can only handle so much wattage at such a low nanometer, which is it's copper, it's silver, it's a whole bunch of stuff that's put in layers of silicon that's with lithography together. It's a big process, but there's only so much we can do.
Simply by waiting until more GPUs were produced and more stock was available,
so,
or simply by allowing
maybe they
more
had too many flaws with the 2 or 3
from the 40
nanometer
series to the 50 series. But it seems like what they were actually trying to do was use,
because they were projecting it to be 2 or 3 nanometers for it. But maybe they had too many flaws. TSMC just had too many flaws in their big chip dies. So if there's too much of a flaw, then they're gonna have to scratch it and just keep the same like die size.
use up all that
Not
40
die
series
size. Die
inventory
size is
before
how
the
big the
50
die
series
is, but
launched, and now you have a situation where there's no
tolerance everything
cards on
is.
the market and scalpers are just having a field day. For all these reasons, it's very difficult to properly review the 5070 Ti right now, and we probably won't have a good understanding until the dust clears and we're at least a couple weeks out from launch and we see how quickly restocks are coming into play.
Okay, so his is basically the same as Jay's, 2 cents. Do this now.
Did their best with it. But if you guys were hoping that the 50 series story would get better as we made our way down to the cards that more folks ladder. In Alan Wake, the 5070 Ti manages a 9% uplift over the 4070 Ti Super, but then loses to AMD's aging 7900 XT.
Wow.
In F124, the 5070 Ti inches a bit closer to pole position and gets closer still in sci-fi roguelike Returnal. In our Vulkan test,
Yeah, the XTX with 4 extra gigs, 199. It's crazy. I mean, it's pretty close to a 20 gigabyte card though.
Red Dead
That's
Redemption
pretty
2,
crazy
we
too.
see the 5070 Ti finally surpass the 7900 XT, but it's not until we look at Cyberpunk where we see a result that meets the technical definition of a lead, albeit barely. With that said, thanks to its much better 1% lows, the
These are all
5070 Ti
1080s,
tops our charts in The
1080p.
Last of Us Part 1 and properly beats Team Red in Black Myth Wukong. Across our suite of games then, we see the 5070 Ti pull off a serviceable 15% lead over its last-gen counterpart, but we also see it demonstrate clearly why NVIDIA wishes that everyone would just forget that that card was replaced by a more super variant.
Holy. Not just due to DLSS 4? Because that's insane. I mean, like, I don't play any of these kind of games. Black Myth Wukong, I've done benchmarks for it, but it's pretty crazy. 5070 Ti is a lot better.
Just over a year ago. It surpasses that card by only 9%. Buh. Of course, at 1080p, it's easy for a card this powerful to end up CPU bottlenecked. So let's push some more pixels to get a better idea of where the 5070 Ti sits in the product stack. Right out of the gate, it manages a measurably better improvement over the last gen Super at 1440p. And what? A 10% is a measurably more than 9? But even then, it still fails to break away from Team Red's 7900 sandwich,
Brutal
which
still.
further illustrates just how disappointing this
1440p. Yeah,
generation is for
F1, 1440p. It's 40 Super, same thing.
gamers. Typically, we would expect a new 70 class GPU to beat, or at least
4080 Super's outbeaten. Same thing as
match
what
the last
J2 said.
generation's 80 series.
Same thing.
But now, not
Crazy.
even the 70 Ti can stand up to the last gen 80 card. That kind of sucks.
Yeah, that sucks. That is just brutal to see. That an older gen, doesn't matter if it's 4080 Super, the older gen 16 gigabyte card is still outbeaten.
Unless you have a
Brutal.
4080, in which case, hey, NVIDIA just saved you a lot of money. Maybe it makes up for it in ray tracing, though. And, well, hey, it compares much more favorably to AMD here, whose 7000 series RT capabilities are more like 2 generations behind NVIDIA, but we are still looking at a meh uplift over the 4070 Ti Super. I mean, if you want to crank the eye candy without upscaling at 1080, the 5070 Ti delivers a great gaming experience, outside of the notoriously demanding Black Myth Wukong. But 1080p Ultra used to cost like $300, not $750. The good news is that 1440p ray tracing puts the 5070 Ti in its biggest lead over last gen so far, a 13%. So if you pretend that the Super doesn't exist, the 5070 Ti does provide decent generational uplift. But the non-Super that NVIDIA wants us to compare it to was mocked for its dismal value proposition. And given that I have Supers in my warehouse right now, it's clear that NVIDIA's Operation Chronos failed.
Fail.
Superly. So why isn't NVIDIA's new 50 series Blackwell much better? Well, for a couple of reasons, but the main one is that it's manufactured on the
gigabyte.
same 4N process node as its predecessor and makes relatively light changes to the underlying architecture compared to last gen. We get lightly improved ray tracing or RT
For their AI neural
moderately
networks,
improved
you know?
tensor cores for AI, and this one is key, seemingly unimproved CUDA cores, which do the bulk of the work in traditional rendering. The main step forward seems to be better integration between the AI and the rendering cores for the sake of future neural rendering technology that demos admittedly very well right now, but it's going to take time to see widespread adoption in games you can play. With all of that said, Blackwell cards do get some pretty big improvements that don't show up on the FPS charts. The media engine for encoding and streaming is capable of
Fast.
significantly higher quality. DP 2.1 UHBR20 connectors at the back allow these monsters to drive 4K display.
Although, don't get why they're comparing from CPU to GPU. They're comparing with the 1400K, but they did. So they don't say what they used for CPU. No, they don't say what they use for.
Up to 240 hertz without compression, and the jump to
Does it say
GDDR7
anywhere?
memory means that our VRAM is now 1 grade.
So one of the biggest reviewers did not even put what they used for the CPU for all these tests. Everyone else did. They used an 800X3D. But nothing.
7 memory means that our VRAM is now 1 greater than.
But that's just odd. But yet they paired the speed with 1400K.
6. What? Oh no! It must have heard me say neural rendering. Hide! DLSS 4 with multi-frame gen is coming! Ah! And it's coming in hot. I'm talking over 150 frames per second in Cyberpunk at 4K with ray tracing set to ultra. Dang! And we get improved image quality over previous generations of DLSS. Our frames look closer to native rendering thanks to the new transformer-based AI upscaling model, and the new tensor cores can generate as many as 3 AI-generated frames for every truly.
Nonus already was the first hands-on person with like 5090, and he was even saying with DLSS 4 with his extra frame gen, it's blurry. So, do you want to sacrifice quality for more frames? No.
Rendered frame, leaving less AI-endowed last-gen cards in the dust. Too bad it comes with numerous downsides, like lowering your base frame rate, only really feeling good when that base frame rate is already high enough to be playable, and introducing weird anomalies. Like any tool, it does have its uses, but don't imagine that it's a magic fix, no matter how much NVIDIA wants you to believe that it is. Of course, that doesn't mean the 5070 Ti is a slow card. For funsies, we got the good folks in the lab wearing their super awesome LTT Labs merch from lttstore.com to drag race the 5070 Ti in 4K against its bigger brother, the RTX 5080, resulting in probably the best argument for this card that we've seen yet. Obviously, it's slower, it's a lower end card, but the value is much better against a card that is sold out everywhere. And it's got the same 16 gigs of VRAM, making both cards likely to be similarly future probable? I don't want to say proof. Our Asus Prime card features a triple fan cooler that uses a flow-through design. It's a little thicker than 2 slots, but it isn't any wider or taller than the 5080 FE, and it managed to keep this 300 watt card at around 70 degrees in both F124 and in Combustor. In our power tests, while we did see a transient spike as high as 360 watts, overall the card seems well behaved as it pulls roughly 9% more power than the 4070 Ti to deliver your sweet, sweet FPS. For power delivery, Asus uses the scandalous connector that's been making headlines for melting on Founders Edition 5090s. But the lower power draw here, by half, means that melting cables shouldn't be an issue. On an unrelated note, when's the last time you checked your smoke alarm? The 5070 Ti is clearly a gaming-focused product, but we like to take a look at productivity anyway, and we were unsurprised to find that the biggest generational uplift is in, you guessed it, AI. With most of our benchmarks seeing substantial improvements over last gen, and especially over the competition from AMD. While the models that you can run will be limited by your mere 16 gigs of VRAM, you're no more limited than you would be on a 5080. Cool card, that one. As for 3D modeling, don't expect much of an improvement, and for video editing, the new card proves capable, if not sensational, with very similar performance to the 5080. Just note, though, that the 70 Ti has one fewer decoder engine compared to its bigger brother. So, for a very large multicam setup, for instance, you could overburden it and end up putting additional strain on your CPU.
So, it's pretty crazy. You could be using NVEC more than NVDEC. You could be using NVEC more. It's encoder, right? These are encoders. But you could be using NVEC encoder more than NVDEC.
All right, with that out of the way, what's the conclusion for this thing? Well, it's complicated. If you spent $599 for a 2070 Super way back in the day, you might be happy to spend $150 more than you did last time on a 5070 Ti that nets you over 2.5 times the performance. And that's a totally valid perspective. So why are reviewers so pissed off about this thing and the 50 series in general? Well, it's because at one point you could wait that same 6 years and the card that you upgraded to would be over 3 times as good for essentially the same nominal price. And then if you factored in inflation, it would technically be cheaper. Not to mention that these new cards here can't even be bought at those advertised prices for reasons that seem to mostly come down to NVIDIA prioritizing their AI customers and their shareholders over gamers. So yeah, I'm mad, because for the first time in my lifetime, the trend of more powerful hardware being available to more people, driving a boom in access to information and economic opportunity, that trend seems to be going in reverse. Maybe AMD's Radeon team can save us? Yeah, I don't know if I'm hopeful, but I'm hopeful.
They're already saying those 9070 XTs are gonna be like $800 or something. Like,
Hoping to tell you about our sponsor.
Rocket money. No one likes hidden fees, but sometimes they're kind of...
it's just ad when I watch it.
It was too much. Last night I said, this is too much.
This is Gamers Nexus now.
This morning I said, this is too much. And now I realize it's too much.
You should not buy this video card, or really probably any of the high-end cards right now. This is the 5070 Ti. It's just the box. It's okay. The market is in chaos. The conditions are at an all-time low for consumers, and it benefits the entire industry, including us, if everybody mindlessly consumes. But we're telling you not to be a part of that cycle. This is not the time to buy an NVIDIA video card. They say this will be $750, but we don't believe it. In fact, some partner models have already been spotted at $1,000, with plenty of others coming in at $850 to $900. We even heard of one partner model that'll have an MSRP above $1,000.
Now, hopefully, Gamers Nexus did not use a 900X 3D like everyone else, and Linus Tech Tips didn't even show what CPU they used to pair it with. So, hopefully, there's a little bit more choice for that.
That's more than a 4080. That's insane. So NVIDIA says this is an RTX 5070 Ti, but it's really more like an RTX 4080 V3, or V4, if you count the unlaunched 4080 12GB, which was a 4070 Ti. The TLDW up front is that the 5080 is about 12 to 16% better than this in some of the 4K gaming scenarios we tested. The 5070 Ti is about 28 to 35% ahead at best of the 4070 Ti, again in those 4K scenarios, but it comes down into the 20% to 28% range when you're at 1440.
So I'm probably blocking it. Error and correction policies. Find their error policies on gamersnexus.com. It's not possible to add into videos in place, and we do not replace videos in place. So they're saying if anything go like error and correction policies, you have to send it over to their website.
Additionally, the lead over the 4070 Ti Super, which is really the one that's easy to lose track of, but is important because it's the closest sort of price analog from the most recent generation. That is only 7.8% to 20% in a lot of 4K situations, or commonly 12 to 16%. And the worst case one we saw was an impressively bad 3.9% better for the 5070 Ti versus the 4070 Ti Super. So again, based on the pricing we're expecting for launch, and also kind of just the MSRP, we don't think you should buy this video card. Honestly, you shouldn't even really watch this video. See you later if you agree. You'll miss the memes that we've packed into all of the card. The 4070 card is a different...
Okay. They paired it with the 9000X 3D, but instead of being at 5.3 gigahertz, it's at 5.4 gigahertz, and they're on the ASUS X670E Hero. Rebar always on, Windows 11. So they have a little bit more details. It is still DDR5 6000, CL28, which is pretty standard for 6000. You can go lower than 28, you can go CL26, probably for 6000, no problem, but it's AMD, so who knows, probably not. But 5.4 gigahertz, so a little bit different.
That has now been...
I would like to see a little bit of variance between the content creators on the CPUs that they're pairing it with.
Subdivided several times, like the 4080 and the 4070 Ti, which was a 4080 12GB originally, already subdivided it. Likewise, the 4080 Super created another subdivision. The 4070 Ti Super created yet another subdivision, and now the 5070 Ti creates a further subdivision. There are so many subdivisions in this block that it'll have an HOA by next week. I'll be here all night. In one of our tests, we saw an average gap between cards in this upper end of 6.7 to 8 FPS card to card, depending.
Yeah, so it's
in Final Fantasy XIV at 4K, the RTX 5070 Ti landed at 97 FPS average, with lows at 83 and 80. That's the same as an RTX 4080, which under normal conditions might sound like a generational improvement on the arbitrarily named GPUs. Instead, what we have is total generational stagnation, because the 5070 Ti will regularly sell at prices, at least for now, approaching what the 4080 was. Even at only a slight elevation to
4080 still being
$850, like for partner models that are on the better
They're
end of
insane, but-
pricing, the card is simply too close to the last generation performance equivalent. The 7900 XTX outperforms the 5070 Ti by 7.4%, with the 5080 16% ahead and the 5090 87% ahead of the 5070 Ti. As for the 7900 XT Hellhound, which was the cheapest partner model for a while, that's at 82 FPS. Generationally, by name, the 5070 Ti improves on the 4070 Ti by 34%, but the 4070 Ti Super is the more recent price replacement, so the lead over the 4070 Ti
Yeah, I'm a
Super
hardcore
is just
overclocker.
13%. That's stagnation. We have the RTX 2070 Super.
I know some things that these content creators don't know, so I'll put on these videos once in a while and kind of explain a bit more, but they're all the same right now. All these content creators are all the same right now. AMD 9900X 3D, yeah, he has 100 megahertz more on his core clock, but and in a different motherboard, but everything else is basically the same.
In a future test, but the 1070 is in here if you want something older. The improvement over the Pascal GTX 1070, which is now 9 years old, is 332% here. At 1440p, the 5070 Ti ran at 187 FPS average. 1% and 0.1% lows are where they should be based on other results, so there's nothing exceptional here. The 5070 Ti outranks the 4070 Ti Super by just 15 FPS, or only 9%. Sadly, this is one of the better ones, but that's still brutal, and it makes this one of the most boring improvements possible when considering the MSRP similarity, and that's before you go and get ripped off for more. As for the other 70 class cards, the 5070 Ti's uplift over the 4070 Ti's.
But it's also like, did they also compare, like, did they also put all these CPUs? No, they didn't. They did not pair all these CPUs with the 9800X 3D. There's no way. That's the thing. That's why all these tests are not, in my opinion, all these tests are not correct. Because they have to pair it with the exact same CPU to get the actual numbers. And apparently the 9800X 3D is bottlenecking 5090, so it probably also bottlenecked 4090.
24%, then 72% on the 3070 Ti, 94% on the 3070 non-Ti, and 307% on the 1070. The uplift has diminished for each of these as resolution came down to 1440p, despite the 5070 Ti not being anywhere close to a CPU ceiling. AMD's RX 7900 XTX leads the 5070 Ti by 13%, up from 7% at 4K. The 5070 Ti also leads the 7900 XT by just 9% here. At 1080p, things get even worse. The 5070 Ti leads the 4070 Ti Super by only 6%, or just 50.
You gotta remember, they're also using the lowest tier 5070 Ti. So the 5070 Ti by Zeus, their prime is their lowest end model.
15 FPS average over the 4070 Ti non-Super, which remains an absolutely absurd distinction to need to make. We're only seeing a 16% advantage on the 5070 Ti. No wonder NVIDIA wants everyone to type a frame rate into a calculator and multiply it artificially for MFG. The new card is just 10% over the 70.
No, AMD is only outperforming for some games with the 900X 3D. But like, let's say we go past the gaming as well. Like, it doesn't matter if you specify certain games, because they're also using certain games. They're not using all, like, they're not going from a whole bunch of games. They're just using a referenced games that they've done and have tests for. That's why you have so many options here. But like, the 14900K is going to outperform 14900K with, could even say the 285K, the Intel Ultra. So you could say that also the 285K put up with the 4090 or 5090 is going to outperform the 900X 3D with like workstation style stuff, not just GPU. Like, for gaming and that, like, if you go for workstation, you're not going to be using 900X 3D. So like, plus you can overclock, you can get way more performance as in DDR5 6000 CL28 instead of DDR5 6000. You can do a DDR5 7 or 8000 on Intel. 8000 is pretty common nowadays on Intel, so or even above, but no one did. Not even Jay's 2 cents, which I was really hoping Jay's 2 cents used the 285K with his 8400 mega transfers per second DDR5. I was really hoping he would do that as well with 285K, because then that would show performance and a little bit different CPU, because the 900X3D, even though they all used it at 5.3 gigahertz and he's using Gamer's Nexus is at 5.4, and a completely different motherboard too, which is really odd too, but even still at 5.3, it's not the CPU itself that's actually making it so that it runs the games better, it's the extra cache. So if you don't need that game on low settings, because that's where the extra cache is going to help you, at 4K or 8K, a 285K or 14900K is probably going to outdo it. Even a 13900K will probably outdo 900X3D on a lot of games and workstation stuff. That's what I have to say. Maybe only on workstation. If you watch the reviews on the 285K versus, or even the 14900K versus the 900X3D, there's 7 or 9 games, the actual 14900K was outbeating the 900X3D, but the 900X3D was crushing it in other games. And a lot of games were games people were playing, some newer games too, like I think it was Hogwarts, that new Hogwarts game. Titanfall, I think, was another one, and what was that other game? Starts with a W, but on certain games, 900XD, yeah, was crushing it. It was crushing the 1400K, it was crushing 285K, but there's games that those CPUs were also beating 900X3D. And you gotta remember, it was always a lot of 1080p, low settings. 900X3D was beating these other CPUs with the exact same GPU.
100XT, then 74% over the 3070 Ti. Blacksmith Wukong is up now.
That's why I'm working on becoming a YouTube creator, so that way I can get these GPUs, so that way I can test it through a whole bunch of different CPUs and not just one, because this is, to me, very boring to see all the same CPU, even though, again, he has a little bit higher overclock, but the exact same RAM, when you can get more performance and not probably bottleneck the 5090, which is the 9800X3D is bottlenecking the 5090 right now. People have already been talking about, and they're saying 9800X3D is not enough CPU.
At 4K,
and what you can do is, you know, updo the actual mega transfers per second. Like I said, faster it can talk, faster it can put these information from CPU to GPU as fast as it can. That's your bottleneck as well as your RAM. So 6000 CL28 is going to be a bottleneck for probably 4090 and 5090. 900X3D only has the cache, doesn't have the actual core frequency that can actually give you less chance of a bottleneck. The cache is just going to help generate frames because it's caching in stuff from the game to the GPU, right? So that's the only thing.
The experimental chart labeling and feel that this test has had enough public visibility to clear that bar. The 5070 Ti ran at the exact same frame rate as the 4080. NVIDIA has basically re-released the 4080 again, and the price isn't even that different, and in some cases, not different.
So basically, the games are being optimized with AMD cache, like the 3D cache, the X3D cache. They're having these games that AMD's 9800X3D is beating the actual like 1400K and 285K because they had AMD in mind, and that they're going to be using that extra cache. That way the CPU can hold on to information, talk faster, so that way it doesn't have to go through this whole process, long process. Doesn't take much process, like it's really fast, but it can hold on to information and then send it off in bigger bulk. That's about it. Instead of going over and over and over, it's holding more batches of information.
At all. In other words, NVIDIA has now released 3 RTX 4080s. This is the third one, and actually it would be the fourth if they stuck to their original plan of the 4080 12GB.
Blacksmith Wukong 4K. Wow. See, this is the thing, like right here. So my 3070 Ti on stock settings with my 13900K, I was getting over 30 frames, and he's saying 28. I was getting over, so I was still on stock settings. Not like I overclocked it. I was getting over 30 frames at 4K.
Instead of the 4070 Ti. At some point, it just seems like this is too much.
It was too much. Last night I said, this is too much. This morning I said, this is too much.
I had to even overclock my CPU to 6 gigahertz, which I can do, and that will give it even way more performance.
And now I realize it's too much.
The 7900X TX matches the 5070 Ti here. The difference is irrelevant and unnoticeable. Against the 4070 Ti
That's sad though. The 4080 is beating the 5070. Both 16 gigabyte cards.
45 FPS average.
Brutal.
The 5070 Ti leads by 13%, or 27% over the 4070 Ti non-super, and similarly over the 7900 XT. The lead over the 3070 Ti is...
Oh, wait. Oh, and they're only on high settings. I was doing 4K cinematic, and I was getting over 30 frames. Over 30 frames, 4K cinematic, everything cranked to the actual max.
81%. At 1440p, the RTX 4080 V3...
I think when I overclocked, I was getting
V4
36.
ran at 87.2 FPS average, with lows at 74.9 and 70.3.
Close to 40.
The third iteration of the 4080 isn't the best one, though. The first version of the 4080 and the second version of the 4080 are within error of each other, but on the V3, aka the 5070 Ti, NVIDIA has enabled multi-fiat generation to make it more interesting.
Only gamers know that joke.
The memes will continue until morale improves,
What we
which
got?
apparently will be never. The RX 7900 XTX is about the same.
What do they got for 1080?
The 5070 Ti is...
So this is 1080p high. It's not even cinematic. This is high settings. 3070 Ti. Where is it? There it is. 60. Okay, yeah.
Again, roughly tied with the...
See, again. So this is where the cache helps because it's 1080p. It's not 4K. It's 1080p. It's more. It's a frame-oriented game, so more frames, better. Like CS2, like Counter-Strike 2, 99X3D is really good for it. But something like this, even though it's a more taxing game, it's 1080p high settings. So even like I said with the 3070 Ti, they're getting better frames than I was getting with my 13900K. But at 4K, I was getting better frames than what they're doing with their 9900X3D.
7900 XTX, although credit to NVIDIA for having improved 0.1% lows, just not by an amount anyone would notice in play. The frame time pacing is still good on both. The 4080 Super and 4080 are again within error of each other, and although they're outside of the error versus the 5070 Ti, the real error is the GPUs we launched along the way. The 5070 Ti ends up leading the 105 FPS average 4070 Ti Super result by a staggering, mind-blowing 9.7%. Made only more impressive by the fact that this was already functionally the same as the 4070 Ti's 100
this
FPS.
This is no ray tracing.
700 XT sits just below this. Starfield is up now at 4K. The 5070.
This isn't even with ray tracing on. It's not the. No one's gonna play these games without ray tracing. So why do they even do a non-ray trace? Brutal.
70 Ti ran at 68 FPS average, this time allowing the 4080 the important distinction of being technically better. The 5080 only leads the 5070 Ti by 12% here as well. Troublingly, for the 5070 Ti in this test, the 7900 XT nearly matches the 5070 Ti, with the 7900 XTX ahead of it by 13%. The 4070 Ti Super and 4070 Ti aren't that different from each other in this one either. At 1440p, the 4080 Super and 4080 are exactly tied, with the 4080 Sub Super, or as NVIDIA calls it, the 5070 Ti, at 101 FPS average. You might be wondering why NVIDIA would launch 3 4080s, but wonder not.
The more you buy, the more you save. That's right.
That's right. The more 4080s you buy, the more you save other people from buying them. The 5070 Ti ends up basically tied with the 7900 XT. The 7900 XTX holds an advantage at 11% ahead. The 5070 Ti's improvement, if you can call it that, over the 4070 Ti Super is an impressively boring 3.9%,
Yeah,
with
that's
the lead
low.
over the 4070 Ti at 11%. That's
really low.
again, impressive, mostly because we're impressed NVIDIA could make something so impressively stagnant. At 1080p, Starfield has the 5070 Ti below the XTX, which has a slight lead at 6%. More impressively, the 4070 Ti Super ran at 120 FPS average. Between the 5080, the 4080s, the 5070 Ti, and the 4070 Ti Super and the 4070 Ti, NVIDIA has managed to make a video card for seemingly every individual frame rate between 110 and 132 FPS. Why they do this? Well, we don't know. Dragon's Dogma 2 is up now.
Yeah,
This one has the Asus RTX 5070 Ti Electrolyte, which is what the games crave, at 73.6 FPS average. That's right between the 4080 Super and 7900 XTX, making the 5070 Ti the first NVIDIA RTX 4080 Super on the market. We won't be impressed until they launch the SSS Super tier. The 5080's lead over the 5070 Ti is just 15%. That small of an uplift is going to weigh on NVIDIA.
Everything I'm showing today are very heavy.
The 5070 Ti leads the 4070 Ti Super by 18% and the 4070 Ti by 35%. At 122 and leading by 15%. Both are behind the 7900 XTX at 126 FPS average. The 5070 Ti is ahead of the 4070 Ti Super by 20% and the 4070 Ti by 34%. The 7800 XT is between these and the regular 4070, followed by the older 3070 Ti at 53 FPS average. At 1440p, the 5070 Ti is just below.
Again, in these though, they're also comparing it to like 3080 4013, which is a top tier card. The Prime is their lowest end model. No overclock done on it. 2400, 2440, or 2450 megahertz, something like that.
Below the 4080. The 5080 leads the 5070 Ti by 13%. NVIDIA basically took what previously would have been a 51 FPS gap from 224 to 173 FPS between the 4070 Ti Super and 5080, and then it split the difference with the 5070 Ti. The 7900 XTX is ahead by 17%, with the XT just below the 5070 Ti. We're moving to ray tracing games now. We'll start with Black Myth, which is heavily NVIDIA favored, and then we'll look at some games that are mixed or lighter workloads. At 4K, with upscaling as defined in the chart header, the 5070 Ti ran at 52 FPS average and tied the 4080 and 4080 Super. The 5080's 59 FPS result had it 13% ahead. Over the 4070 Ti Super, we see a 15% lead for the 5070 Ti. AMD gets absolutely crushed in this test, unfortunately for them. At 1080p and still ray traced, the 5070 Ti ran at 112 FPS average and led the 4080. The 5080 has improved on the 5070 Ti.
Maybe they just put the ray tracing versus non-ray tracing just to have the 7900 XTX up there. Then they put that one test first, just to make it so AMD has a little bit of a say on this stuff. But you're not gonna be running these types of games without ray tracing.
Ti by 9%. The proximity of cards from the 4070 through the 5080 is crazy though. We have the 4070 at 80 FPS, then the Ti at 92, then the Ti Super at 95, then the 4080 at 106, the 4080 Super, which isn't shown but is the same, and then the 5070 Ti at 112. Then we have the 5080 at 122 FPS. Dragon's Dogma 2 at 4K with ray tracing is next. In this one, the 7900 XTX is more competitive and lands at 66 FPS average, which is between the 5080 and 5070 Ti. It's unfortunate that AMD gets crushed so hard in some of the other games like Black Myth Wukong, because it does okay.
The ray
in
tracing
the ones
cores
that are
aren't that
less
good.
Crazy intensive.
It
The
is what it
5070
is.
Ti ends up basically tied with the 4080 Super, which is basically tied with the
With my 2080 Super, wasn't I getting more than 25 frames? I think I was getting decent frames with my 2080 Super.
4080. The jump over the 4070 Ti Super
I've
is
looked
54
back on the
FPS
live
average
stream
is
that I did.
18%.
I made a video too on it, but
1440p positions
it's
the
of the
5070
live
Ti
stream. It's not
between the
very good
4070 Ti
quality.
Super and the 4080. It's not clear why this card needs to exist, but it does. The improvement against the 4070 Ti Super is just 10.8%. The 7900 XTX runs at 108 FPS average and is between the 4080s and the 5080. Let's move on. At 1080p, the 5070 Ti ran at 131 FPS average and was roughly tied with the 7900 XTX. The 4080 leads the 5070 Ti here by a few percent. The 5070 Ti leads the 4070 Ti Super by 9%.
followed by the
Yeah, that's
7900X in the middle
1080p.
ground, and then the 4070 Ti at 16%. In Resident Evil 4 at 4K with ray tracing and upscaling, the 5070 Ti ran at 118 FPS average and tied the 4080 and 4080 Super exactly. It's within run-to-run variance and error. The 7900X TX leads in this lightweight RT workload with a 14% advantage, posting a big difference from the heavier Cyberpunk and Black Myth workloads that we run. At 1440p with the same settings, we
Also
see a
16
similar
gigabyte
lineup.
card
The
versus a
5070 Ti is again within error
4
of the
gigabyte
4080
card.
and 4080 Super, which are the same. The 700X TX is slightly improved. The 4070 Ti Super is slightly behind, and this is uninteresting. Efficiency's up now. We've explained this test in the past, so we'll just get to the results. Efficiency remains a relatively new test for us to include in each review, so we haven't rerun the 4070 cards for efficiency just yet. In Final Fantasy XIV at 4K, the 5070 Ti landed at 0.37.
Remember, AMD used to be more efficient, right? Now, NVIDIA's gotten better.
FPS per watt. It pulled
Price to
264 watts in
performance
this
too,
test,
AMD used
approaching
to be
its TDP
better,
spec.
but now
The
they're
5080
losing
ends
out.
up slightly more efficient
They put
with
the
the
prices
4080
up too
Super
high.
equivalent. The 7900X TX is at a large disadvantage here due to its power consumption. In Final Fantasy XIV at 1440p, the 5070 Ti ended up at 0.73 FPS per watt, which has it just below the 4080 and 5080. The 5070 Ti improves on the 4060 class cards, but also is significantly more efficient than the 7900X TX. In Black Myth Wukong at 1080p, we found the 5070 Ti to be between the 4080 Super and 5080 for efficiency. The 7900X TX shows again that this is its weakness, but its particular performance deficiency in Black Myth in general is hurting it disproportionately. In ray tracing performance with F124, we found the 5070 Ti to perform about the same as the 4080. The 7900X TX scores significantly lower. Overall here you're seeing much lower numbers than in some of the other charts, and that's because there's a heavy ray tracing workload tested with the higher resolution.
5090 is holy. 570 watts, and it's still fairly efficient.
As well. All of this means that NVIDIA is basically just selling you an RTX 40 series card, maintaining elevated prices, and doing so while pushing DLSS 4 and MFG as the only real differentiating factor on the is louder than both of these. Well, this will change as the prices move in the future, but we don't review the future. We review what's shipping and reality. And currently, reality says that this entire situation is absurd. And for those of you who've been around a long time watching GN, first, thank you. But secondly, you might remember this. It feels an awful lot like sort of the 2020 era of GPU launches. For now, the simple version is we don't recommend buying the 5070 Ti, not only because the pricing is just, it's just not great. I mean, you're looking at the third or fourth iteration of a 4080 now, and it's really not that different in what the real world actual street price is going to be. And that's even in the future, ignoring the initial launch frenzy. So we just don't recommend it, but let's just recap as quickly as possible some of the data for those of you who jumped here. Broadly speaking, we found that the 5080 performs in the range of 9% to 16% better than the 5070 Ti, depending on the resolution of the game. The 7900X TX is often better than the 5070 Ti in rasterized testing, with the range in our games spanning equivalence to 17% at the high end, but more commonly 6% to 13%. There were some instances of regression for the 7900X TX versus the 5070 Ti, but as has been the case, it only really got crushed in Black Myth or Cyberpunk type ray tracing. The 5070 Ti only improves on the 4070 Ti Super by a range of 3.9% or 2.2 if you go down to 1080p, and that wasn't even CPU bound.
They're showing exact, like, 4080 Super, like even the extra 100s, they're still around the same frames for it. And yeah, the 4080 FE's beating it. 4080 Super, for some reason, lower in this test. It doesn't make sense. Why is the 4080 Super lower in this test? 1080p Ultra.
To 20% at the highest end, and it's often 12 to 16% if you're looking at the heavier resolutions. That is not a good improvement for a generational jump, especially considering the important factor that we're talking about sort of the middle of the average range. That means there's worse improvements like we just mentioned, and the actual street price
as expected to the 4070 Ti Super's original street pricing. So street to street pricing, we're not talking to MSRP to street here, especially with instances below 10% performance. It's an awful value. Remember that the Super Series was regularly in stock for its actual MSRP. And so the actual price of the 5070 Ti, we can't see it in advance in a review. We don't review the future. We don't know what the prices will land on launch day around when the video goes up. But based on what we've seen with the 5080 and 5090, our strongest recommendation right now is to just wait in general. To buy a video card, just let it calm down. Anyway, finally, the 5070 Ti is equal to the 4080 Super. We don't care what MSRP the 4080 was. It was stupid. The 4080 Super effectively overwrote that MSRP, and that was $1,000, and it was actually available around $950 to $1,050 for a lot of its life recently, especially at the $950 mark before it went out of stock. Now, for the rest, I mean, AMD really needs to not fuck this up, and we're not sure what they're going to do. So it comes down to pricing.
They're gonna,
AMD traditionally has taken this really strange approach where
prices I'm hearing on the 9070s
change the
is not
prices
good.
sometimes within literal days of launch, and sometimes like 3 months after launch. But it's basically an accepted constant that whatever AMD says its price is, it's going to come down in like 1 quarter because they're going to push it way too high. They're going to do that. NVIDIA minus $50, and for some reason realize once again, oh wait, that's not good enough because they just buy. There's already NVIDIA minus $50. It's other NVIDIA. So AMD really can't screw this up for the rest of us. But we don't know what that outcome is going to be. They have publicly said they're not going to make a high on this generation. It's deeply disappointing because you look at the 7900 XTX on these charts now, where at launch, the 7900 XT and the XTX, it was easy to be critical of them. But then you look at the follow-ups, like when we did a 7900 XT follow-up, and it was $700 or something, and it started to become more favorable. And so it's that regular tick of AMD chooses a price, has absolutely no confidence in it, and it gets shaken into a lower price pretty quickly thereafter. And again, sometimes even before the launch, technically. So we don't know what they're going to do. But they are part of this discussion too, because NVIDIA is able to do the things it does because it controls the market. And it's not NVIDIA's responsibility to let its competitors catch up. Likewise, if its competitors don't want to, they're happy with status quo, or they're off doing data center or whatever, then fine. But as a consumer, we just think right now is not a good time to buy a GPU. There are some positives. The positives are on the overclocking side. If you're on an older generation card, depending on what generation it is, there is sometimes a huge amount of headroom where on the lower end, you might be looking at like 10% gains or something. But if you really spend some time on an OC or...
And remember, this is the low-end card that they all did. They all did the low-end ASUS Prime model, which is the lowest-end 5070 Ti. So it's going to be like 2440 or 2450 megahertz, something like that. They've got overclocks on these things, like plus 400 on the core. Like, we're talking like almost like 3,000. Like, the next step up is their OC one, and I think it's like 2640 or 2650 or 2660, somewhere around there, for their next tier up on ASUS, which is like 200 megahertz more on the clock, which is going to be a big boost, like a big boost, because then it can actually utilize more of that GDDR7 memory along with the actual core frequency to actually boost games.
Especially you start digging around for custom vBIOS, there's a lot of caveats there to be careful of, but you start doing...
The only place you want to go for like a new vBIOS is Tech Power Up.
And stuff like that. You go back far enough, there were times when you could get like 20 to 30% gains from a card. And we've shown some of that recently with one of our 1080 Ti revisits, I think it was. So there's some room there. Don't forget about overclocking to just try and stretch the life out a little longer. If you're kind of like on that edge where it's a little stuttery in the games you like, but it's not completely unplayable, you might be able to just do some tuning and try to stretch it one more generation, which is something we'd always recommend. Obviously, if you want to build a computer just because it's fun, go for it. But if you don't need to and you have no interest in doing that, you just want to be able to play the games at a frame rate you like and you're on the borderline, keep that in mind. Another thing that's positive is that there are a lot of interesting and good components launching right now. It just seems to be the GPU market that's totally fucked. So on the CPU side, the 9800 XOC is very exciting, and the 5090 kind of continually proved that because it could actually keep up even in some of these 1080p situations.
All right. So we'll also look at And boom. So we got 5090s in here. We got 5070 Ti yet. No. No. Not yet. The performance of 5090s though. It's fast. Safe Disk is going ham with it. Oops. For Port Royal. Port Royal, 43,515 points. At almost 3.3 gigahertz. And the overclock on the memory, GDDR7 memory, 17,000 from 14,000. Crazy, man. Crazy, dog. Well done on that. 41 seconds. 41 seconds for 32 bill. Almost 3.5 gigahertz. This should, maybe play around with it a bit, but usually you want to lower this as low as you can go, so like negative as much as you can go. He's not even on good RAM. See all 34, 4,000. You could have bumped that up. 36. Yeah, easily. He's using the 9950X too, though. All these scores are going to be beaten. Yeah, all these scores are going to be beaten. I want to look at 5090 here. Baron Dom is kind of what I want to look at for this, but still using 950. Cloudgate. $13,900 KS at 7.2 just on P cores. So, and it's outdoing that. That's not what I want to see. I want to see, did he do all at that? No, okay. So, oh, he did also 99. Did everyone use that? No, there, see, 14,900 KF at 6.1. He has record, and that is Firestroke Extreme, which is kind of what we need to look at. 14,900, 14,900, 9950X at 5.7. 900X 3D. Almost 6,000 points less. Because it's cores. Gotta add in the cores. So maybe we'll look at graphics core. 66,525. 68,000. Nice. So 900X 3D is actually pretty good for the graphics score. Back. Let's try the Ultra though. Oh, there's only one test. Time Spy. Just one person. Not enough people done it yet. 5090. 8K optimized. Did they both use the same CPU? 14.9. 14.9. Yeah, makes sense. Although, like, you don't need a lot of cores for this one, so I'm not sure why they didn't use the 90 800X 3D or the 9950. Maybe they wanted the best score for it. One of the best scores. 14.9. Like 14.9 as well. Yep. So that doesn't help us much there. Fractal computing. What they use. No one's done it yet, so. No one's done it. Let's try sorbet. Just one person? Oh my god. Not enough people have done it. Here we go. So, 9800X 3D. 40,000 points. Really? It's annoying. Liquid nitrogen? On what? 1590? What? Why would you use liquid nitrogen? Maybe it wasn't a very good video card. Maybe it was low end, 5090. Steel Nomad. Still just 2 people. Probably using 9950 as well. Yeah. That's boring. Not enough people. It's boring. Okay, well, 1080p. 14.9 as well. 14.9 as well. They must have talked. They must have talked and said, like, I'm buying this card. I should ask him in the Discord. I got a lot of these guys in the Discord, so I can just ask them why they all use the same CPU, roughly all AMD CPU for certain tests and Intel for another one. Do they want to beat these scores later on? I don't know. Did they just want to make it so like maybe they get sponsored from AMD? Dom definitely sponsored by AMD, but well, not sponsored, but I mean has a good word with Dom. So he's all AMD. Well, that sucks. $53,000. Crazy. Crazy good. think that's gonna be the end of this video. Hopefully it loads up quickly on the YouTube. That way I can make a video on this later. I probably will put some timestamps in this live stream, so let me know what you guys think. Is it really a waste of money? In a way, yes. If you're with like a 4080 or 4070 Ti, it's not really a jump up for you. It will help for some things. For just having the encoder, of course, it could be better. But remember, 5070 Ti versus the 5080, you're gonna be losing the NVDEC encoder. It's gonna be, we have one less. For NVEC, which is mostly what you're gonna be using anyways. What I use is NVEC. You still have the exact same. So through all the 50 cards, it's all could be about the same performance that way. So let me know what you guys think. Performance is really good though. For 5090 is pretty crazy for the performance. But I don't know, let me know in the comment section below what do you guys think about this video. Like, what do you think about all these YouTubers with their same CPU, same RAM frequency and all that for this whole testing? Different motherboards used, but I mean, same CPU used. They could have used something else as well, just to show. Linus Tech Tips to even show what CPU used, which is kind of odd. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. And thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. And as always, don't forget to get